Good evening and welcome to this program, which is presented under the sponsorship of the Gertrude Clark Whittle Fund for Poetry and Literature. Our poets tonight are Elizabeth Bishop and James Merrill. Miss Bishop will read first. As many of you know, Miss Bishop is no stranger to this auditorium. In 1949 and 50, she was the consultant in poetry at the Library of Congress. Her first book was published a couple of years before that. It was called North and South. Perhaps that's an allusion to the fact that she spent some of her early years in Nova Scotia, and then after that lived for some 17 years in Brazil. Her next book after North and South reprinted North and South, and with it new poems under the title A Cold Spring, and this one was awarded the Pulitzer Prize in 1955. A decade later, she published Questions of Travel, and in 1969, the fortunately inaccurately titled Complete Poems of Elizabeth Bishop. Miss Bishop, of course, has, from the very beginning of her career, attracted the praise and the admiration of all discriminating readers of contemporary poetry. And although it seems perhaps pointless to divide poets into men and women, if one is so tempted, of course, it goes without saying that Miss Bishop is our most eminent and distinguished woman poet. I may also say that she is among the very small select number of the most eminent and distinguished poets today. Robert Lowell has written of her work, I am sure no living poet is as curious and observant as Miss Bishop. What cuts so deeply is her tone of large, grave tenderness and sorrowing amusement. When we read her, we enter the classical serenity of a new country. Miss Bishop is going to conduct us into that new country now.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. When I was at the Library of Congress in 49 and 50, I didn't seem to do very much writing, and I think I shall read first a very short and not very serious poem. I think this is my entire accomplishment while I was here. But I had a beautiful office that is now the library, I think. Mr. Hoffman doesn't have that, and I looked out at the Capitol Dome constantly. I like that balcony very much. So this is a very frivolous little poem I wrote about that. It's called View of the Capitol from the Library of Congress. Moving from left to left, the light is heavy on the dome and coarse. One small lunette turns it aside and blankly stares off to the side like a big white old wall-eyed horse. On the east steps, the Air Force band in uniforms of Air Force blue is playing hard and loud, but queer, the music doesn't quite come through. It comes in snatches, dim, then keen, then mute, and yet there is no breeze. The giant trees stand in between. I think the trees must intervene, catching the music in their leaves like gold dust, till each big leaf sags. Unceasingly, the little flags feed their limp stripes into the air, and the band's efforts vanish there. Great shades edge over, give the music room. The gathered brasses want to go boom, boom. That must have been in the summer, I believe. And my other Washington poem is, the title is from Trollope's Journal, Winter 1861. And I wrote it about a century and a year or two later, I think, in 1961 or 2 or 3. And this was a Eisenhower period poem. And actually, I've just taken sections from Trollope's journal with almost no changes at all, and from one letter. It was the time of the Civil War, of course, and he had an introduction to President Lincoln, but he didn't really, he looked down on Lincoln, so he never even went to call on the president, and he hated it. Winter 1861. As far as statues go, so far there's not much choice. They're either Washingtons or Indians, a whitewashed, stubby lot, his country's father or his foster sons. The White House in a sad, unhealthy spot just higher than Potomac's swampy brim. They say the present president has got ague or fever in each backwoods limb. On Sunday afternoon, I wandered, rather I floundered, out alone. The air was raw and dark, the marsh half ice, half mud. This weather is normal now, a frost and then a thaw, and then a frost. A hunting man, I found the Pennsylvania Avenue heavy ground. There, all around me in the ugly mud, hoof-pocked, uncultivated, herds of cattle, numberless, wandering steers and oxen stood, beef for the army after the next battle. Their legs were caked the color of dried blood, their horns were wreathed with fog. Poor, starving, dumb, or lowing creatures, never to chew the cud or fill their maws again. The effluvium made that damned anthrax on my forehead throb. I called a surgeon in, a young man, but with a sore throat himself, he did his job. We talked about the war, and as he cut away, he croaked out, "Sir, I do declare everyone's sick. The soldiers poison the air." That should be with a southern accent, but I can't. I'll now read a poem that is not exactly new. It's about 2 years old, I guess. It hasn't been in a book yet. It's called Crusoe in England. A new volcano has erupted, the papers say, and last week I was reading where some ship saw an island being born. At first a breath of steam 10 miles away, and then a black fleck, basalt probably, rose in the mate's binoculars and caught on the horizon like a fly. They named it, but my poor old island's still unrediscovered, unrenameable. None of the books has ever got it right. Well, I had 52 miserable small volcanoes I could climb with a few slithery strides. Volcanoes dead as ash heaps. I used to sit on the edge of the highest one and count the others, standing up, naked and leaden, with their heads blown off. I'd think that if they were the size I thought volcanoes should be, then I'd become a giant. And if I had become a giant, I couldn't bear to think what size the goats and turtles were, or the gulls, or the overlapping rollers. A glittering hexagon of rollers closing and closing in, but never quite, glittering and glittering, though the sky was mostly overcast. My island seemed to be a sort of cloud dump. All the hemisphere's leftover clouds arrived and hung above the craters. Their parched throats were hot to touch. Was that why it rained so much? And why sometimes the whole place hissed? The turtles lumbered by, high-domed, hissing like tea kettles. And I'd have given years or taken a few for any sort of kettle, of course. The folds of lava running out to sea would hiss. I'd turn, and then they'd prove to be more turtles. The beaches were all lava, variegated, black, red, and white and gray. The marbled colors made a fine display. And I had water spouts. Oh, half a dozen at a time, far out. They'd come and go, advancing and retreating, their heads in cloud, their feet in moving patches of scuffed up white. Glass chimneys, flexible, attenuated, sacerdotal beings of glass. I watched the water spiral up in them like smoke. Beautiful, yes, but not much company. I often gave way to self-pity. Do I deserve this? I suppose I must. I wouldn't be here otherwise. Was there a moment when I actually chose this? I don't remember, but there could have been. What's wrong about self-pity anyway? With my legs dangling down familiarly over a crater's edge, I told myself pity should begin at home. So the more pity I felt, the more I felt at home. The sun set in the sea. The same odd sun rose from the sea, and there was one of it and one of me. The island had one kind of everything, one tree snail, a bright violet blue with a thin shell crept over everything, over the one variety of tree, a sooty scrub affair. Snail shells lay under these in drifts, and at a distance you'd swear that they were beds of irises. There was one kind of berry, a dark red. I tried it one by one and hours apart. Subacid and not bad, no ill effects, and so I made home brew. I'd drink the awful, fizzy, stinging stuff that went straight to my head and play my homemade flute. I think it had the weirdest scale on earth, and dizzy whoop and dance among the goats. Homemade, homemade, but aren't we all? I felt a deep affection for the smallest of my island industries. No, not exactly, since the smallest was a miserable philosophy. Because I didn't know enough. Why didn't I know enough of something? Greek drama or astronomy. The books I'd read were full of blanks. The poems, well, I tried reciting to my iris beds. They flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of what? One of the first things that I did when I got back was look it up. The island smelled of goat and guano. The goats were white, so were the gulls, and both too tame, or else they thought I was a goat too, or a gull. Ba, 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 and shriek, 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 ba, shriek, ba. I still can't shake them from my ears. They're hurting now. The questioning shrieks, the equivocal replies, over a ground of hissing rain and hissing ambulating turtles got on my nerves. When all the gulls flew up at once, they sounded like a big tree in a strong wind, its leaves. I'd shut my eyes and think about a tree, an oak, say, with real shade somewhere. I'd heard of cattle getting island sick. I thought the goats were. One billy goat would stand on the volcano I'd christened Mont d'Espoir, or Mount Despair. I'd time enough to play with names, and bleat and sniff the air. I grabbed his beard and looked at him. His pupils, perpendicular, narrowed up and expressed nothing, or a little malice. I got so tired of the very colors. One day I dyed a baby goat bright red with my red berries just to see something a little different, and then his mother wouldn't recognize him. Dreams were the worst. Of course, I dreamed of food and love, but they were pleasant rather than otherwise. But then I'd dream of things like slitting a baby's throat, mistaking it for a baby goat. I'd have nightmares of other islands stretching away from mine, infinities of islands, islands spawning islands like frogs' eggs turning into polywogs of islands. Knowing that I had to live on each and every one eventually for ages, registering their flora, their fauna, their geography. Just when I thought I couldn't stand it another minute longer, Friday came. Accounts of that have everything all wrong. Friday was nice. Friday was nice, and we were friends. If only he had been a woman. I wanted to propagate my kind, and so did he, I think, poor boy. He'd pet the baby goats sometimes and race with them or carry one around. Pretty to watch. He had a pretty body. And then one day they came and took us off. Now I live here, another island that doesn't seem like one, but who decides? My blood was full of them, my brain bred islands. But that archipelago has petered out. I'm old. I'm bored, too, drinking my real tea, surrounded by uninteresting lumber. The knife there on the shelf, it reeked of meaning like a crucifix. It lived. How many years did I beg it, implore it not to break? I knew each nick and scratch by heart, the bluish blade, the broken tip, the lines of wood grain on the handle. Now it won't look at me at all. The living soul has dribbled away. My eyes rest on it and pass on. The local museums asked me to leave everything to them, the flute, the knife, the shriveled shoes, my shedding goatskin trousers, moths have got in the fur, the parasol that took me such a time remembering the way the ribs should go. It still will work, but folded up looks like a plucked and skinny fowl. How can anyone want such things? And Friday, my dear Friday, died of measles 17 years ago come March. I'll now read a poem about a painting, and then I'll read another one that's connected with this and tell about the connection. This is obviously about Nova Scotia, where I lived when I was very small. But it's about a real painting I still have. About the size of an old-style dollar bill, American or Canadian. Mostly the same whites, gray greens, and steel grays. This little painting, a sketch for a larger one, has never earned any money in its life. Useless and free, it has spent 70 years as a minor family relic, handed along collaterally to owners who looked at it sometimes or didn't bother to. It must be Nova Scotia. Only there does one see gabled wooden houses painted that awful shade of brown. The other houses, the bits that show, are white. Elm trees, low hills, a thin church steeple, that gray-blue wisp, or is it? In the foreground, a water meadow with some tiny cows, 2 brush strokes each, but confidently cows. 2 minuscule white geese in the blue water, back to back, feeding, and a slanting stick. Up closer, a wild iris, white and yellow, fresh squiggled from the tube. The air is fresh and cold, cold early spring, clear as gray glass. A half-inch of blue sky below the steel-gray storm clouds. They were the artist's specialty. A speck-like bird is flying to the left. Or is it a fly speck looking like a bird? Heavens, I recognize the place. I know it. It's behind, I can almost remember the farmer's name. His barn backed on that meadow. There it is, titanium white, 1 dab. The hint of steeple, filaments of brush hairs, barely there. Must be the Presbyterian church. Would that be Miss Gillespie's house? Those particular geese and cows are naturally before my time. A sketch done in an hour, in one breath, once taken from a trunk and handed over. Would you like this? I'll probably never have room to hang these things again. Your Uncle George, no, mine, my Uncle George, he'd be your great-uncle, left them all with Mother when he went back to England. You know he was quite famous in R.A. I never knew him. We both knew this place, apparently, this literal small backwater, looked at it long enough to memorize it, our years apart. How strange, and it's still loved, or its memory is. It must have changed a lot. Our visions coincided. Visions is too serious a word. Our looks, two looks. Art copying from life, and life itself. Life and the memory of it so compressed they've turned into each other. Which is which? Life and the memory of it cramped, dim on a piece of Bristol board. Dim, but how live, how touching in detail. The little that we get for free, the little of our earthly trust. Not much. About the size of our abidance along with theirs, the munching cows, the iris crisp and shivering, the water still standing from spring freshets, the yet-to-be dismantled elms, the geese. Well, many years before I wrote that little poem, I wrote one called Large Bad Picture. And apparently this has been misunderstood somewhat, but my great-uncle George, was quite true, wanted to become a painter, and when he was 13 or 14, he went to sea, as a cabin boy, and he went to Labrador 2 or 3 times. I don't know where all he went. And when he came back, he painted these large pictures that decorated my grandmother's front hall. And they weren't exactly primitives. They weren't very good, certainly, and they're very romanticized. But he earned enough money. He also earned money by painting. It was a small shipbuilding town. And so he painted ships he'd painted the picture of the ship when the ship was finished. And over the kitchen table, we had one that he had painted when he was 12, his first painting. And he had painted it was a square rig. And the sails were full like this, but the flags were blowing like that. So, of course, the owner of the ship had rejected this, and he'd had to do it again. But it's still hanging there. I saw it last October, I think. Well, this is the painting about the man who later went to England and Paris and studied painting and became a rather conventional academic painter, English R.A. This is about a picture that he painted when he was 14, and I wrote this about 25 years or 30 earlier than the one I've just read you. Remembering the Strait of Belle Isle, or some northerly harbor of Labrador, before he became a school teacher, a great-uncle painted a big picture. And I must change that. He never was a school teacher. I think I like the rhyme more or less. Receding for miles on either side into a flushed, still sky are overhanging pale blue cliffs hundreds of feet high, their bases fretted by little arches, the entrances to caves running in along the level of a bay, masked by perfect waves. On the middle of that quiet floor sits a fleet of small black ships, square-rigged, sails furled, motionless, their spars like burnt matchsticks. And high above them, over the tall cliffs' semi-translucent ranks, are scribbled hundreds of fine black birds hanging in ends, in banks. One can hear their crying, the only sound there is, except for occasional sighing, as a large aquatic animal breathes. In the pink light, the small red sun goes rolling, round and round and round at the same height, in perpetual sunset, comprehensive, consoling, while the ships consider it. Apparently they have reached their destination. It would be hard to say what brought them there, commerce or contemplation. Well, this is another Nova Scotian, I seem to be in the north this time, Nova Scotian poem about the east coast of Nova Scotia called At the Fish Houses, south of Halifax, where it's a very rugged coastline. Although it's a cold evening, down by one of the fish houses, an old man sits netting. His net, in the gloaming almost invisible, a dark purple-brown, and his shuttle worn and polished. The air smells so strong of codfish it makes one's nose run and one's eyes water. The 5 fish houses have steeply peaked roofs, and narrow cleated gangplanks slant up to storerooms in the gables for the wheelbarrows to be pushed up and down on. All is silver, the heavy surface of the sea, swelling slowly as if considering spilling over, is opaque. But the silver of the benches, the lobster pots and masts, scattered among the wild, jagged rocks, is of an apparent translucence, like the small old buildings with an emerald moss growing on their shoreward walls. The big fish tubs are completely lined with layers of beautiful herring scales, and the wheelbarrows are similarly plastered with creamy, iridescent coats of mail, with small, iridescent flies crawling on them. Up on the little slope behind the houses, set in the sparse, bright sprinkle of grass, is an ancient wooden capstan, cracked, with 2 long bleached handles and some melancholy stains like dried blood where the ironwork has rusted. The old man accepts a lucky strike. He was a friend of my grandfather. We talk of the decline in the population of codfish and herring while he waits for the herring boat to come in. There are sequins on his vest and on his thumb. He has scraped the scales, the principal beauty, from unnumbered fish with that black old knife, the blade of which is almost worn away. Down at the water's edge, at the place where they haul up the boats, up the long ramp descending into the water, thin silver tree trunks are laid horizontally across the gray stones, down and down at intervals of 4 or 5 feet. Cold, dark, deep, and absolutely clear, element bearable to no mortal, to fish and to seals. One seal particularly I've seen here evening after evening. He was curious about me. He was interested in music. Like me, a believer in total immersion. So I used to sing him Baptist hymns. I also sang "A Mighty Fortress is Our God." He stood up in the water and regarded me steadily, moving his head a little. Then he would disappear, then suddenly emerge almost in the same spot with a sort of shrug, as if it were against his better judgment. Cold, dark, deep, and absolutely clear, the clear, gray, icy water. Back behind us, the dignified tall firs begin, bluish, associating with their shadows. A million Christmas trees stand waiting for Christmas. The water seems suspended above the rounded gray and blue-gray stones. I've seen it over and over, the same sea, the same, slightly, indifferently swinging above the stones, icily free above the stones, and then the world. If you should dip your hand in, your wrist would ache immediately. Your bones would begin to ache, and your hand would burn as if the water were a transmutation of fire that feeds on stones and burns with a dark gray flame. If you tasted it, it would first taste bitter, then briny, then surely burn your tongue. It is like what we imagine knowledge to be, dark, salt, clear, moving, utterly free, drawn from the cold, hard mouth of the world, derived from the rocky breasts forever, flowing and drawn. And since our knowledge is historical, flowing and flown. I'll now read one or two very short ones and one new one, fairly short. This one will have to be changed, as you see, somehow. I don't know how at the end, but I'll read it the way it is now. It's called Filling Station. Oh, but it's dirty, this little filling station, oil-soaked, oil-permeated to a disturbing overall black translucency. Be careful with that match. Father wears a dirty, oil-soaked monkey suit that cuts him under the arms, and several quick and saucy and greasy sons assist him. It's a family filling station, all quite thoroughly dirty. Do they live in the station? It has a cement porch behind the pumps, and on it a set of crushed and grease-impregnated wickerwork. On the wicker sofa, a dirty dog, quite comfy. Some comic books provide the only note of color, of certain color. They lie upon a big, dim doily draping a tabaret, part of the set, beside a big hirsute begonia. Why the extraneous plant? Why the tabaret? Why, oh why, the doily? Embroidered in daisy stitch with marguerites, I think, and heavy with gray crochet. Somebody embroidered the doily. Somebody waters the plant, or oils it, maybe. Somebody arranges the rows of cans so that they softly say, "Eso, so, so, so." To high-strung automobiles, somebody loves us all. I'm afraid that's wasted. No. This is another short poem, or light poem. This was actually written in Brazil, but it could take place almost anywhere where you have, in the old-fashioned way, you had a sewer, a seamstress who came in to sew once a year for a while. It's called House Guest. I mentioned in it that there's a knife grinder who plays a tune. Well, all the knife grinders in Rio de Janeiro are Portuguese, and they have these large wheels, and they're always painted blue, a certain shade of blue. And they go around and they scrape a knife on the wheel. It gives a very shrill sound, and then you run downstairs in the apartment house and get your knives sharpened. But there's one who somehow or other learned to vary the speed of the wheel, so he learned how to play tunes. And he was a great hit, naturally. I said he played the national anthem. Actually, what he played was a song called Cidade Maravilhosa, the marvelous city. It's the national anthem for the city of Rio. And he got so famous he appeared in Carnival. He probably still does every year, all by himself with his knife grinding thing, pushing it, playing this thing on this sharpening wheel. It's called House Guest. The sad seamstress who stays with us this month is small and thin and bitter. No one can cheer her up. Give her a dress, a drink, roast chicken, or fried fish. It's all the same to her. She sits and watches TV. No, she watches zigzags. Can you adjust the TV? No, she says. No hope. She watches on and on without hope, without air. Her own clothes give us pause, but she's not a poor orphan. She has a father, a mother, and all that, and she's earning quite well, and we're stuffing her with fattening foods. We invite her to use the binoculars. We say, "Come see the jets." We say, "Come see the baby," or the knife grinder who cleverly plays the national anthem on his wheel so shrilly. Nothing helps. She speaks. I need a little money to buy buttons. She seems to think it's useless to ask. Heavens, buy buttons if they'll do any good. The biggest in the world, by the dozen, by the gross. Buy yourself an ice cream, a comic book, a car. Her face is closed as a nut, closed as a careful snail or a 1,000-year-old seed. Does she dream of marriage, of getting rich? Her sewing is decidedly mediocre. Please, take our money, smile. What on earth have we done? What has everyone done, and when did it all begin? Then, one day, she confides that she wanted to be a nun, and her family opposed her. Perhaps we should let her go, or deliver her straight off to the nearest convent. And wasn't her month up last week, anyway? Can it be that we nourish one of the fates in our bosoms? Clotho, sewing our lives with a bony little foot on a borrowed sewing machine, and our fates will be like hers, and our hymns crooked forever. I'll read one more very short one that I've never read aloud before because it's fairly new. It's called 5 Flights Up. Still dark. The unknown bird sits on his usual branch. The little dog next door barks in his sleep inquiringly, just once. Perhaps in his sleep, too, the bird inquires once or twice, quavering. Questions, if that is what they are, answered directly, simply, by day itself. Enormous morning, ponderous, meticulous, gray light streaking each bare branch, each single twig along one side, making another tree of glassy veins. The bird still sits there. Now he seems to yawn. The little black dog runs in his yard. His owner's voice arises, stern. You ought to be ashamed. What has he done? He bounces cheerfully up and down. He rushes in circles in the fallen leaves. Obviously, he has no sense of shame. He and the bird know everything is answered, all taken care of. No need to ask again. Yesterday brought to today so lightly. A yesterday I find almost impossible to lift. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miss Bishop. James Merrill's first book, appropriately titled First Poems, was published 24 years ago. Since then, half a dozen successor volumes have appeared. The Country of the Thousand Years of Peace in 1959, followed a few years later by Water Street. Then in 1966, Nights and Days, which deservedly won the National Book Award, The Fire Screen in 1969, and the year before last, Braving the Elements, which, as you all know, won the Bollingen Prize. Mr. Merrill has also written fiction. His short stories were published early on, and more recently, 2 novels, The Seraglio and The Diblos Notebook. I had the opportunity of reviewing The Fire Screen in the Times Book Review, and I remember having written something to this effect, that no American poet since Wallace Stevens had created a world so elegant and cosmopolitan as that in James Merrill's poems. And I said that some of the poems were among the most memorable of the decade. But this is really true of James Merrill's poems in each of the 3 decades in which he's been writing poems. He strikes a very individual note. We've heard a lot about confessional poetry in the last 8 or 10 years, but James Merrill has handled his memories of his own life in a way which is not really confessional, because I think it is something more accomplished than that. He has always managed to shape his memories in a way in which the shaping force of art has so organized what is remembered that it is transformed into something more universal, perhaps, than it started out by being. In this, Mr. Merrill reminds me much more of Proust than of any of his American poetic contemporaries. What I'm trying to say is that he strikes a note which is distinctively his own and is distinguished and is unforgettable. We're very fortunate tonight to have James Merrill read some of his poems to us.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. Let me start with a short poem. This is a piece of landscape that engaged me very much some months when I was living in New Mexico. It's north of Santa Fe, and it's called the Black Mesa. During the Spanish conquest, a community took refuge, was besieged at the top of the mesa, and I believe were starved to death. I refer to the novel Thais of Anatole France, where the holy man becomes a sex fiend and the courtesan becomes a saint. And Grande Horizontale is a phrase you may know, which was applied often to the great French courtesans of the turn of the century. In case you're wondering, the mesa is meant to be the holy man who speaks the poem, and the surrounding landscape is the horizontale. So much is parchment where I gloom, character still sharp enough to prick into the hide my igneous old spells and canticles of doom. The things that shape a person, peace. Depth therapy in early stages crowned one fuming anchorite with river stones. Remember, though, how in Thais the desert father falls for the land's lie, that Grande Horizontale, blown shawls shining and raveling to this day above erosions in her pot of rouge, whom any crossing cloud turns dim, ascetic, otherworldly, lost to him. By way of you, 1,000 human frailties found in me their last refuge. The turquoise lodged for good one night in a crevice where the young blood drummed. Discharge, salvo, sulfur ringed me round below the waist. I knew thirst. Dawn's, the viceroy's eagle glittered like a gnat. Sieges like that come late and end soon. And we are friends now? Funny friends. Glaringly over years you knit a wild green laprobe I shake off in tears. I steal past him who next reclaims you, keep our hushed appointments grain by grain. Dust of my dust, when will it all be plain? And while we're out that a ways, I have a poem which is set in, the first part of it is set in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. The second part is set in Atlanta. And I gave to the two poems an epigraph from John H. Finley Jr.'s book, 4 Stages of Greek Thought. The heart that leaps to the invitation of sparkling appearances is the heart that would itself perform as handsomely. The poem is called Up and Down, and the first section, the up section, is called Snow King Chairlift. Prey swooped up, the iron love seat shudders onward into its acrophilic trance. What folly has possessed us? Ambulance, give me your hand, try thinking of those others unhurt return by twos from June's immense sunbeamed arc. With such transfigured faces, we sought admission on the shaky basis that some good follows from experience of anything, or leaving it behind, as now each urchin, street, and park sent sprawling by the mountain's foot. Why, this is fun. Appalling bungalows, goodbye, dark frames of mind, whatever's settled into comfort, despair, sin, expectation, apathy, the past, rigid interiors that will not outlast their decorator or their millionaire. Groaning of board and bed of ruses, oh, I've had it up to here. 50th story, glass maze, ice cube, daybreaks inflammatory, montage subsiding into vertigo, till with their elevations all on file, joys now demolished that I used to live in. This afternoon, I swear, halfway to heaven, none housed me. No, not style itself, in style. Risen this far, your ex-materialist signs an impetuous long lease on views of several states and skies of several blues, promptly dismantled by the mover missed. What's going on? Loud ceiling shaken, brute maker of scenes in lightning spurt on spurt. How did those others, how shall we avert illuminations that electrocute? Except that suddenly the danger's gone. Huge cloudscapes hang in the sun's antechamber. Somebody takes our picture, calls a number. We've done it, reached the heights, and quit our throne. While knowing better now than to repeat our soul anabasis, unless in rhyme, I love that funny snapshot from a time when we still thought we were each other's meat. The very great or very fatuous complicate the pinnacles they reach, plant banners, carve initials, end a speech, my fellow Texans, let us pray. Not us. You merely said you liked it in that chill, light-hearted atmosphere, a crow for witness, and I that words profaned the driven whiteness of a new leaf. The rest was all downhill. Au fond, each summit is a cul-de-sac. That day, at least, by not unprecedented foresight, a cozy cabin had been rented. Before I led you to the next chair back and made my crude but educated guess at why the wind was laying hands on you, something I no longer think to do, we gazed our little fills at boundlessness. And the trip down is called the Emerald. Hearing that on Sunday I would leave, my mother asked if we might drive downtown. Why, certainly, off with my dressing gown. The weather had turned fair. We were alive. Only the gentle general she married late, for both an old way out of harms, fought for breath, surrendered in her arms, with military honors now lay buried. That week, the arcana of his medicine chest had been disposed of, and his clothes, gold belt buckle, and the letter from President Roosevelt went to an unknown grandchild in the West. Downtown, his widow raised her parasol against the Lenten sun's not yet detectable malignant atomies, which an electric needle unfreckles from her soft white skin each fall. Hence, too, her chiffon scarf, pale violet, and spangle-paced dark glasses. Each spring we number the new dead. Above ground, who can remember her as she once was? Even I forget, fail to attend her, seem impervious. Meanwhile, we have made through a dense shimmy of parked cars, burnished by the midday chamois, for mutual trust. Here cool gloom welcomes us, and all, director, guard, quite palpably adore her. Spinster tellers, one by one, darting from cages, sniffling to meet her son. Think of her having a son. She holds the key whereby palatial bronze gates shut like jaws on our descent into this inmost vault. The keeper bends his baldness to consult, brings a tin box painted mud brown with drawers. She opens it, security, will, deed. Rummages further, rustle of tissue, a sprung lid. Her face gone queerly lit, fair, young, like faces of our dear ones who've died. No rhinestone now, no dilute amethyst, but of the first water, linking star to pang, teardrop to fire, my father's kisses hang in lipless concentration round her wrist. Gray are these temple drummers who once more would rouse her, girl bride jeweled in his grave. Instead, she next picks out a ring. He gave me this when you were born. Here, take it for when you marry, for your bride. It's yours. A den of greenest light, it grows, shrinks, glows, hermetic stanza bedded in the prose of the last 30 semi-precious years. I do not tell her, it would sound theatrical. Indeed, this green room's mine, my very life. We are each other's. There will be no wife. The little feet that patter here are metrical. But onto her worn knuckle slip the ring. Wear it for me, I silently entreat, until the time comes. Our eyes meet. The world beneath the world is brightening. I'd like to read a longish poem now. It can best be described in a nutshell as a poem containing astronomy. What happened was that about a year ago, I came upon a book called Hamlet's Mill by Giorgio de Santillana and Hertha von Deschend, which is a marvelously inspiring book to someone as ignorant as I am about these matters, making a very lofty case for the astronomical sources of myth throughout the world. Splendid things in it like some Sumerian star names that are just a mass of capital letters with periods and no spaces and superscripts. I try to embed one of those into the poem. Something else that happened about that time was that a Greek family whom I helped in a way to come to this country and who have been living downstairs from me in Connecticut asked me to be the godfather to a baby who was by then about 6 months old. And they had named her for one of her grandmothers, and the name was Urania, and that rang a bell also because Urania turned out, as I hoped, to be the muse of astronomy. One other thing, a record gets played at the end of this poem, which is a piece for soprano and cembalo of Purcell's, the expostulation of the Blessed Virgin, which I hope some of you know, but it doesn't matter. Verse for Urania. Through the dimness, curtains drawn, eyes closed, where I am composing myself before tonight's excitement, it's not quite 5, yet outdoors the daylight will have begun to ripple and deepen like a pool. Comes your mother's footstep, her voice softly, hesitantly calling. She'll have come upstairs to borrow something for the evening, cups or chairs, but it can't be urgent, and the footsteps fade before I've made my mind up whether to answer. Below where you live, time will be standing cowed among the colors and appliances. What passionate consumers you've become. Second washing machine, giant second TV, hot saffron, pink, eyeshadow ultramarine. Rooms like those ghostly ones behind the screen with just the color tuned to very loud. Your father's out in his new silver cloud delivering invitations. You've all been up since dawn, not you, of course, you're a baby, but your mother and your sister. Between chores, teasing each other's hair like sisters, touching rouged indexes to one another's cheek. The lamb will have cooled nicely in its fat now, cake been iced to match the souvenir rosettes, 2 ribbons with your name and mine, whiskey and setups set up like 10 pins. According to tradition I'm affecting ignorance of, the post-baptismal party ought to be given by the godfather. But this is your godfather speaking, and fun's fun. I've already showered you with garments priced inversely to their tininess, have been shown rushes of what else my doom is to provide you with, world without end, music lessons from beyond the tomb, doll and dentist and dowry, that 3D third television we attain so far exclusively in dreamland where you are. Would that I were. All too soon I'll place round your neck a golden chain and cross set with stones watery as the stars at noon. And don't forget the fancy sheet you'll want the moment you are lifted, born anew, squalling and squirming out of the deep font, while the priest lifts only his deep baritone that makes the skull a vault of melismatic sparklings, and myself groan with your weight. Renunciation of the vanities in broken Byzantine on your behalf, or your father's flash bulbs popping, or your mother's eyes laughing to see salvation's gas inflate their fat peach petal bébé Michelin, not having made you, on me, a lighter burden. Time drawing near, a clock that loses it tells me you must wake now, pagan still. Slowly the day-glow minnow mobile twirls above you. Fin glints ripple in the glass, protecting an embroidery. Your great-grandmother's? No one remembers. Appliqued on black, cross-section of a pomegranate, stem and all. The dull gold velvet rind full as a womb with flowers. Their faded silks entwine the motto, Kaftotha perassi. This too will pass. You're being named for yet another science whose elements cause vertigo, even, I fancy, in the specialist. A sleepless and unlettered urban glow on everyone's horizon turns to gist that rhetoric of starry beasts and gods, whose figures, whose least phoneme made its fine point in the course of sweeping periods, each sentence 30 lives long here below. From out there notions reach us yet, but few and far between as those first names we knew already without having to look up, children that we were, the chair, the cup. But each night dimmer, children that we are, each night regressing, dumber by a star. Still fiction helps preserve them, those old truths. Our slights have turned to fairy tales, or worse, don't look at your TV. The storybooks you'll soon be reading me about the skies abound with giants and dwarfs. Think of the wealth of pre-Olympian amber washed up on the shores of Grim, the beanstalk's tenant cyclops grown obese on his own sons, the bears and Berenice. Or take those masterfully plotted high society conjunctions and epicycles in a late fable like The Wings of the Dove. Take, for that matter, my beanstalk couplet above, where such considerations as rhyme and meter prevail, it might be felt, at the expense of meaning, but as well create, survive it. For the first myth was measure. Finally, take any poor small-town starstruck sense of love that makes the world go round. See how the phrase stretches from mystic to Mount Palomar, back to those nights before the good old days, before the axle jumped its socket so that jeans in shock flashed on, off, head to toe, before Mill turned to Maelstrom and IBM wrenched from Pythagoras his diadem. Adamant nights in which our wisest apes met on a cracked mud terrace not yet and with presumption more than amateur stared the random starlight into shapes. Millennia their insight had to flee outward before the shaft it had become shot back through the planetarium, cathodic with sidereality. As Mulkaksidi in Sumerian saw through haphazard clay to innermost armatures of light, whereby the ghost walks, in a twinkling he has learned to scan. Where has time flown? Since I began, you've learned to stand for seconds, balancing, and look away at my approach coyly. My brain cells continue to snuff out like sparks at the average rate of 100,000 a day, the intellect suspiciously resembling Eddington's universe in headlong flight from itself. A love I'd been taking nightly readings of sets behind the foliage now. I wonder what will rise next from the sea, the heart no less suspiciously remaining geocentric. Of an evening I creak downstairs, unshaven in my robe, jaw with your father in his undershirt. He's worn out by a day of spreading tar, overtime upon America. The TV off, you and your sister sleeping, your mother lifts from needlework a face lovelier, I find, without makeup, even as worry stitches her white brow. She's written twice and sent the photographs, silence from her people, weeks of it. I've asked myself how much the godfather they picked contributes to imbroglio. Someone more orthodox? I'll never know. Whoever does. From the start, his fine, frank grin, her fine, nearsighted gaze said, take us in. Let them make anything they liked of me, from personal effect to destiny. Now should he reappraise or she regret, fly back, why don't they? We've a daily jet. Ah, but time lost, missed payments, they're in deep. Listen, your sister whimpering, her sleep dislocated, going on 3 years. Some days the silver cloud is lined with tears. Another day, when letters thriftily stamped for surface mail arrive, Connecticut is heaven once again. And what if I'd done nothing? Where would you be? One more baby back there in the grease, your father firmly putting his best face on pros and cons, when every day makes $7 at the foundry, never in my life. Why, I say to me and this kid, she yours. Let's hope that my expression reassures. Finding a moment, I've written, rose from bed where I'd been imagining the baptism. In my old faith, bed was the baptism. To dress for it. Then all of us were racing the highway to a dozen finishing lines, every last one unquote.